अस्य श्रीरामरक्षास्तोत्रमहामन्त्रस्य बुधकौशिकऋषिः श्री सीतारामचन्द्रो देवता अनुष्टुप्छन्दः सीताशक्तिः श्रीमतु हनुमान् कीलकं श्रीरामचन्द्रप्रसादफलसिद्ध्यर्थे रामरक्षास्तोत्रपारायणे जपे विनियोगः।
Om Ajnanatimurandasya Gyananjanashalakhaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Kopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Jai Shri Radha Govinda. Very good. Well, as I think we've seen with previous talks, in spirituality, because spirituality tends to be so broad an area of concern, we tend to find many, many words that are repeated again and again and again without necessarily the qualifying and all-important spiritual and philosophical understanding behind those words. You know, there are hundreds of words. Even the word spiritual itself is often misunderstood, misused. You know, I like to give this example because I actually heard someone say this once as they were having some dessert. They actually said, "Oh, this chocolate is so wonderful, it's almost a spiritual experience." Yeah, someone actually said that once. So it's interesting how so many of these words are misunderstood. Spirituality, love, compassion, etc. What I want to talk about today very specifically is one of these words, one of these concepts, and that is compassion. Because compassion also is one of these words which is very popular today and used again and again and again, but with almost zero understanding of what the word compassion means. You know, it's interesting how I remember, well, maybe 3 years ago or so, and I won't give any specifics because it's not meant as a criticism, it's just meant as an illustration. I was at a nice event here in Omaha where there were some Buddhist monks who were there, and after a long ritual, one of the monks began to give a talk, and the talk was about compassion, and he went on for approximately 45 minutes or so, basically repeating the same thing again and again in different words. We need to show compassion toward everyone. We need to always be compassionate. We must always, no matter where we find ourselves, be compassionate. He kept saying things like this again and again and again, but never defining compassion, never explaining, well, what does that mean? You know, to hear again and again and again that we need to be compassionate is good if you know what compassion means. If you don't know what the word compassion means, if you don't know what it looks like, if you don't know how we are meant to act in such a way that we exhibit compassion toward others, then to simply have it drummed into your head, we must be compassionate, we must be compassionate, means nothing. So, let's talk about precisely what is compassion in the spiritual sense. You know, I remember years ago seeing an interesting bumper sticker, and I'm sure probably other people here have seen this as well. It said something to the effect of, God first, you second, me third. Has anyone ever seen this bumper sticker or heard this saying? You've heard it, okay. When I saw this, I was really struck by the fact that in that little bumper sticker, the person actually encapsulated compassion in a way, in the most general, but at the same time spiritually correct senses of the term compassion. The idea of compassion means nothing if, on the one hand, God is not involved. So in other words, if it's not spiritually based. On the other hand, interestingly, we also are involved. So you notice that it didn't just end with God first, you second, but me third, me third. So we are involved. We also have the ability to have compassion toward ourselves as well. And very often we need to. We very much need to. But again, for individuals for who that's first, that then becomes ego. That's not actually spiritual compassion. But before I go on about what is the nature of actual compassion, as always, I like to base everything upon the Shastra, upon the Vedic scriptures. So I want to read a little, just a little statement here about compassion by Sri Dharma Rishi, who is one of the rishis. Okay, and this is from the Bhagavata Purana, or Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 10, verse 8, in case you want to look this up on your own. So let me read what he has to say about compassion. And then for the most part, for the rest of this talk, I want to kind of comment on what he says here, because it's actually very deep. So this is what the Rishi says. One who has no compassion for humanity in its suffering and does not sacrifice his impermanent body for the higher causes of spiritual principles, dharma, or eternal glory, is certainly pitied even by the immovable beings. This is a very heavy verse. This is a very, very heavy verse. You know, again, as I've said in the past, with so many of these verses, you can explore them so deeply, it is amazing. And this one especially is indeed very heavy. What is it saying? First, it's saying just how important compassion is, and more than this, how we express compassion has to be in such a way that we care more about other beings than we even do for our own bodies. What does that mean? That means that compassion is limitless. There is no limit to how much compassion we can and should show for others. Now, of course, that being said, if you see a little ant that is about to be, let's say, somehow inadvertently crushed, you see someone walking, he's about to step on the ant. Does that mean you must risk your life to save that ant? No, not necessarily. See, that's not what the verse is saying. It's not an extremist verse. What it's saying is you must be prepared in some circumstances. You must be prepared internally, in your attitude, in what's happening within, such that if you find yourself in a situation, maximally, a maximal type of situation, where indeed you need to risk your own impermanent body. See, he's very careful to say this. Keep in mind, the body is impermanent anyway. You see, then if you find yourself in such a situation, you must be willing, ready, and able to indeed even give up your own body, if the circumstances call for it. If the circumstances call for it. You know? So that's the first thing. Second thing that I want to point out about this is that you'll notice that this is stated in the negative. In the negative. In other words, let me read just the beginning part of this again. One who has no compassion for humanity and its suffering. You see, he's not saying one who has compassion, but he's stating this in the negative. An individual who does not have compassion, and then he goes on. Okay? Now, again, we've seen in the past that nothing in the scripture is stated by accident. There are no accidents in the scriptures. Everything is done very much on purpose. Why is he stating this in the negative? The reason why he's stating this in the negative, yes, stressing it, yes, definitely, but also he's implying something. He's implying something. You see, often when you state something in the negation, not always, but often, when you state something in the negation, in the negative, what you're doing is not necessarily stating something in a very overt way, but implying something. So what is he implying? What he's implying is that the vast majority of individuals, of course, don't have such compassion, at least not this type of compassion. Let's say perfect karuna, Maha-karuna, perfect great compassion toward beings. This is why he's stating this in the negative. When we read throughout the Vedic scriptures, but especially the Bhagavad Gita, what we'll find is that humanity is seen as falling into one of two very general categories. And these are very general categories. There is a lot of gray in between. There definitely is. You know, but philosophically, philosophers don't like gray. We like things to be cut and dry. So this is why things are often stated in this way. When you look at humanity, what do you find? According to Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita, what you find is people of Daivic nature and people of Asuric nature. These are the two terms that are used, right? Daivika and Asurika. Okay, Daivika and Asurika. What does this mean? Well, Daivika. Daivika comes from Deva. All right? You find people who have godly nature. People who are good, people who are spiritual, people who are wise, philosophical, people who enjoy giving rather than merely receiving. Okay? But then you find the opposite. You find people who are of Asuric nature. Okay? And this term comes from Asura. Asura. Again, this is clearly stated in the Bhagavad Gita. The Asura is the opposite of the Deva. The Asura, translation of this, is demonic, a demonic person, a self-centered individual, a person who is not wise, a person who is not spiritual, a person who is not morally good, a person who enjoys receiving much more so than they enjoy giving. And more than this, what we find is that when we look at the Asura personality, and again, these are extremes, the Deva versus the Asura. There's a lot of in between, but really we're not going to learn from the in between. We're going to learn from the extremes. That's how we learn. What we find is that the Deva, the godly individual, is someone who has empathy for all living beings. So a little while ago, before I even came into the room to give the talk, you were talking about vegetarianism. You know, the Deva, the Daivika, the person who is godly, does indeed become vegetarian eventually. You know, not necessarily right away, but eventually they become vegetarian. And more than this, what's interesting is it tends to happen very naturally. Why is this the case? With the godly individual, they see all sentient beings around them as beings who they have empathy with. What does empathy mean? Empathy means that when you look upon that other being, whether it's a human, or again in this case, whether it's even an animal, whether in fact it's even a plant, you relate to them.
Identify.
Yes, you identify with them. You identify with their happiness, you identify with their suffering, and more, when you see some other being suffering, you suffer. You suffer. If you ever have this happen to you, that wherever it is, even if you're just watching television, you're watching the news, and you see someone suffering on the other side of the world, and something just stirs in you, where you begin to suffer, just seeing it, you're a Deva. You're a Daivika. You're someone who has natural empathy and compassion toward other living beings. But then, what is the Asura? The Asura is the opposite. The Asura is what clinically, psychologically, is called the psychopath, the sociopath, narcissistic sociopath. There are many different kinds of Asuras. It's interesting. I remember years ago I read through the DSM-4, I believe it's called, which is the handbook of psychiatry. I was doing some research on depression, and I read through this. I remember reading the descriptions of narcissistic people, narcissistic sociopaths, plain sociopaths, psychopaths, all of these different sorts of very negative individuals. And as I read the descriptions of these individuals, it just struck me again and again and again. This is repeating what the Bhagavad Gita says. Very interesting, because when you read the 16th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita very specifically, the entire chapter is about these two natures, the godly versus, let's say, the psychopathic nature. And more, it's interesting, that chapter talks more about the psychopathic nature. Much more, in fact, than the opposite. In fact, I've even had people ask me in class, because we went through the Bhagavad Gita about 2 or 3 years ago. And when we went through this chapter, someone actually asked me, Acharyaji, why is it that Krishna is spending so much time talking about the Asura and barely talking about the Deva? And my answer was this: it's because you need to know the Asura intimately to not become a victim of the Asura. See, the Deva is described infinitely throughout all the scriptures. But Krishna decided to take most of one chapter of his Bhagavad Gita and talk about the opposite, talk about the demonic person. The good person, you'll find so much description of what the good person looks like, such that it will occupy you for the rest of your life. You know, but you also need to know what the evil person looks like. Very, very important. So, The reason why this is stated in the negative, very specifically, is for this reason. So that we can understand this contrast, and that we not be like the Asuric person, but that we be like the Devic person, that we be someone who is very compassionate. Let's go on a little bit deeper with this. So, one who has no compassion for humanity in its suffering, and does not sacrifice his impermanent body for the higher causes of Dharma and eternal glory. Let's deal with that little portion for a second. There are two types of compassion, generally speaking, that are spoken of in the scriptures. And interestingly, not just in Sanatana Dharma, but interestingly, and this applies to Buddhism as well. In fact, they use the exact same words. There is karuna, which means compassion, but then Maha-karuna, great compassion. And there's a difference between the two. Compassion is, again, that natural impulse that almost any good human being will have, that when you see someone suffering, you want to alleviate that suffering. Again, that's natural to any good person. Maha-karuna, on the other hand, is something that is much deeper. And that's what's being pointed at here in this verse. And when he says very specifically, when he talks about how this person must be willing to give up even the temporal body for these higher causes of Dharma and eternal glory, what does this remind you of? Oh, I should say, who does this remind you of? Yeah, Jesus, and actually in so many people. There have been so many people throughout history who gave up literally of themselves, of their bodies, for something greater. Yeah, the Buddha mortified himself for 6 years. So many rishis. There were so many beings who just gave of themselves, who died as martyrs, who died helping others. So again, as we talk about this, of course, this verse is not saying that, we should give up our lives today, in compassion to others. What it's saying is we internally must have this within us, such that if we need to, we will. If we need to, we will. Okay? But more, how does that state come about? Because, see, even a suicidal person might seem like someone who's giving up their lives for someone else, but maybe they're just mentally ill. No. It's not even enough merely that, I'm willing to give up my body, for a higher cause. Because any soldier will also do that, but they're not necessarily a saint, you see. It's more than that. The question is, why are they in that frame of mind? Why? It's not merely duty to country. It's not something negative. There's something psychologically wrong with them, so they don't care about their own life. No, it's not something like that. On the contrary, actually, the sage cares very much about their own life. Very, very much. What brings this about is several things. First, the understanding that indeed we are not these bodies. Thus, that's why he states about these temporary bodies. So once we come to the point of, interestingly, not even necessarily full self-realization, this actually comes very early, that on the spiritual path, we come to the point where we realize we're not the body. We truly do realize that we're not the body. And it's not just a, nice little idea. We truly realize it. We truly begin to see ourselves as this observer inside, that we are literally inside of this vehicle, this, let's say, robot, this car, this vehicle that we have control over and that we can do things with. We begin to literally perceive ourselves in that way. So this is the first thing that is meant by this. That true compassion is based upon self-realization, it's based upon wisdom, it's based upon spiritual insight, the idea that we know what we are. Because you see, again, if you understand implication, it's very nice how this works. If we know we're not the body, well, we know we are the soul. You see? If we know that we are not merely the temporal, then by implication, we know that we are the eternal. We know we are the atemporal. All right? So this is the first thing. The second thing is that, again, by stating this idea that we are even willing to give up the temporal body for a higher cause, What else is this indicating? Spiritually. How else is this basing compassion upon a firm spiritual foundation? What really is the impetus for the spiritual person to want to help others?
That we realize that we are all the same. That my Atman is the same as your Atman. We're different in the same, but we're all, we're all intimately connected.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. However, I'm looking for one word that has 4 letters, starts with L, ends with E.
Love.
There you go. Love.
She described it.
Yeah, exactly. You described it. But it's important to point it out exactly. It's love. This also is what this verse is pointing to. That the reason why we are willing to give up of ourselves in order to help others is because of love. You know, what is in common human society the perfect example of a person who expresses love? Mother. Very good. Mother. Why? What does the mother do?
She might die giving birth.
Yeah.
To take care of the babies like Mama Bear.
Exactly. Motherhood is a perfect example of what is being spoken about in this verse. Perfect example. Mamta, it's called. This idea of literally giving of one's body, giving of oneself, such that another being will thrive. You know, when we look at the mother, yes, it's true what you said. The mother is literally risking her life in childbirth. Once the child is, the mother carries the child for 9 months or so. That's a tremendous burden upon the mother, especially when it gets to the latter stages. Childbirth is painful. It's not a pleasurable experience for most people. When the child is born, the mother breastfeeds the child, literally gives of herself to that child, and then on and on as the child is a baby and then gets a little older as a toddler, etc., etc. But again, what is the foundation of that? It's love. The mother loves that child. Well, in the same way, this gives us kind of an indication, both using this example of mother, but again, tying it perfectly to this verse. We are meant to be also like this for the world. And again, I need to keep stressing this. Not to the point of extremes. What does this mean? Every child we see, oh, come to me, I'll take care of you. We have to be realistic, of course. We have to be very realistic. This has to be something practical and workable in the world. What is of importance is this, not necessarily that we attempt to help all living beings, because being finite ourselves, that's an impossibility. But we want to. Anyway. That desire is there. We know we can't. Oh, but if only we could. See, that's what the spiritual person is feeling. In Buddhism, of course, you have the bodhisattva. You have the concept of the bodhisattva, which is a very similar sort of concept. They take the bodhisattva vow, and it's a slightly lengthy vow, but essentially the essence of it is, I am about to achieve enlightenment. I'm literally one step away from ending all of my sufferings and achieving full nirvana. But as I look around me, what do I see? I see that there are so many beings who are in pain, who are suffering, who are not experiencing nirvana. So I am going to take a Maha-karuna. I'm going to take a great vow, and this is what that vow is, that I will not myself take that last step into nirvana until I personally have assured that every other living being has reached there before me. Wow. That is the bodhisattva vow. Now, this is the question. Is that realistic? No, because how many living beings are there? Infinite, really. So what does that mean? That poor person will never achieve nirvana, because there will always be other beings who need to be liberated. So can it be done? No, not really. But it's the attitude that's important. Yes, the desire, the wanting to, that is of importance. You see.
What about the action to go with the wanting? In other words, not living in your palatial house wanting, but actually doing something to make things better for other people.
Yes.
You have the means.
Yes. We do have the means. We do have the means, actually. Let me answer that question this way. And actually, it's a perfect time to ask that question because that's kind of where I was going anyway. This is the attitude of compassion, but yes, what does compassion look like in action? And this also is an area where, unfortunately, there is a lot of misconception. Because, again, theoretically speaking, even the atheist, even the person who has no spiritual inkling, for that matter, even the Asura can seem to be compassionate. Can seem to be compassionate. Is it not the case that a demonic person, I won't tell you who to envision, but just envision anyone who would come to mind, there are all kinds of demonic people out there, all sorts of evil billionaires and different people we can think of. Can that person not make a tremendous show with all the cameras watching and go to a soup kitchen and say to everyone, oh yes, we all have to show compassion, and even though I'm such a billionaire, I'm just trying to help my community, I'm giving back. Oh, here you go, stinky homeless person. Okay, next one, And it's like, is he not showing compassion? Well, externally he is, but internally not. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say there's a difference for me. I think any, you call it an Asura personality, somebody who can have sympathies, but that those people have that's coming out of ego.
Mm-hmm.
I am sorry for you that you are not like me.
Yes, exactly.
Rather than we are all the same, and I feel love for you, so I want to lift you up with us all as a team.
Yeah, exactly. This is exactly the problem. You just stated it perfectly. Even an Asura can exhibit so-called compassion, but it's based on the body alone. Yes, it's based on, we are exactly what our empirical senses tell us we are. So who am I? Yes, I am this very wealthy billionaire of such and such an age, etc., etc. I am this body. And who are you? Well, you're a stinky homeless person. And that's all you are. And I'm going to therefore show quote-unquote compassion toward you by giving you some food. This is the bodily concept of life. And when we give out of so-called compassion in the bodily concept of life, it's external only. It's external only. It is only when, again, this verse is so perfect, it's amazing. It's only when we understand the temporality of the body and that we are all eternal souls that we can then show true compassion. It's when that person, and interestingly, whether the person is a billionaire or himself or herself homeless, doesn't matter. When that person understands, I am not merely what I am identifying with an illusion, and more, you are not a stinky homeless person. You are Atman. You are consciousness, the same as I am consciousness. And in that sense, yes, we are connected. Only when the person has the ability to perceive in this way do they now have the ability to truly give out of compassion. And not just materially, but now spiritually as well. And this leads to the next important distinction that we have to make. Not all giving, not all compassion is the same. And I've made this distinction before, but I want to go very deeply into it. When we think of compassion, unfortunately, being in the materialistic West, especially the consumeristic West, we tend to think of the body. We tend to think, how do I show compassion? Again, in a practical way. Well, it means that, yes, I have to serve at a soup kitchen, or I see someone who's poor, I have to give them some money, etc. That is compassion. That is compassion, but it is one level of compassion. It is a lower level of compassion. Why? Because we're helping their body.
Space. Space.
Yeah, it's a base compassion. Yeah. It is compassion. It is important. It needs to be done. And all throughout the history of Sanatana Dharma, we find all sorts of people, including great sages, who indeed give compassion in that very immediate sort of way, where someone is starving, someone is homeless, someone needs some immediate assistance, we help them. We help them. And that is called dhanam. Dhanam. D-A-N-A-M. Dhanam. This is charity. This is charity. That's the literal translation of the word dhanam, charity. Charity, however, again, has several elements. It tends to be short-term, so we're helping them just right then and there with their immediate needs. The person's starving, okay, I'll give you some food. You know, once the food runs out, well, then you're on your own. You see, it's very immediate, and it tends to be toward the body. Okay, and it's also a type of compassion which, again, anyone can express. Anyone from the saint all the way down to literally the opposite, the most demonic person. Anyone can express charity. All right. Now, there is danam, and then there is daya. Daya. This is spiritual compassion. This is spiritual giving. D-A-Y-A, daya. With this sort of compassion, we are looking not just at the other person as a body, but now we are looking at them as an eternal being. And more, the compassion within us is arising from someplace completely different. It's not arising from our ego. It's not arising from illusion. Now it's arising from the true self. Now ourselves, having had some spiritual realization, having experienced the bliss, literally the bliss, the ecstasy, the anandam, the bliss of spiritual enlightenment and experiencing God directly, we understand several things. That these people who we are encountering, and not just the humans, the non-humans as well, that A, they are suffering, B, there is a way to alleviate their suffering, not just today, not just for the next week or the next month or for the next year or even for all of this lifetime, but forever. And to end their suffering in such a manner that it's converse, that eternal bliss is there in its place. And we understand that this is the greatest way in which to help them. We understand that our problem, and I'm saying this in the most general and global of senses, our problem as human beings upon this troubled earth is ultimately a spiritual problem. It's not economics. We have tried every economic system humanly conceivable, from the far left to the far right, from communism to Nazism, everything in between. We've tried every economic system, every political system, every kind of social construct that we can think of. You know, we've tried everything. And what we have seen is that no matter how we try to adjust things in this world, everyone's suffering. Sometimes there's a little pinch less, sometimes there's a lot more. But we're all suffering. And the reason why is, again, ultimately, the problem is a spiritual one. The problem is one of ego. Why is there inequity economically? Why is there war and violence? Why is there ugliness in the world? Cultural ugliness, social ugliness? Why is there conflict? Why are there all of these bad things that we can talk about? Illusory ego. Because we're convinced we're something that we are not, and because we're convinced of that, and everyone else around us is as well, we have to fight. It has to be me, me, me. But this is the problem. That person is also thinking me, me, me. And so is that person, and that person, and that person, and that ant, and that tree, and that bird. So the problem ultimately is a spiritual one.
Spiritual impoverishment.
Spiritual impoverishment. Yeah. Yeah. So the person who is viewing through spiritual eyes understands that the greatest way to help people is, what was the example I gave the other day, just to vegetarianize it? You can give a person an apple, or you can show them how to grow an apple tree. You know, you can give a person immediate relief, or you can help them in such a way, educate them in such a way that their problem is taken care of permanently. So we can help people by simply giving charity. And unfortunately, the hands have been out since the beginning of creation, and they will be out until the end of creation. There will always be a need of charity. We can give everything we have, and every person with resources can give everything that they have. There will still be poverty. There will still be people with their hands out. That's the nature of this world. Or we can choose to help people spiritually. Spiritually. When we do this, this is the highest giving that we can give. This is the highest compassion that we can express. And practically speaking, this is called seva, service. So this is why I always need to make this distinction, and the scriptures make this distinction, between charity versus service. Again, with charity, you're just giving of your wealth to someone to help them with their body. With service, on the other hand, you are now helping them spiritually. Now, what does this look like in a very day-to-day practical sort of way? What it means is helping people to know who they are. It means when you find people who are troubled, counsel them, but counsel them in a spiritual sort of way. Help them with their immediate problems, but also help them to understand that whatever your problem is, you know, you're addicted to something, you had some terrible traumatic thing happen to you in childhood and you just can't get over it, you're going through a divorce, you know, just anything, any bad thing happening in your life. Counsel them in such a way that you help them with that immediate problem, but also you explain, but you know what? This is a world of suffering. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, happiness and distress comes of their own accord, just like the winter and summer seasons. Just like the winter and summer seasons. It is a place where, okay, once you solve that problem, that's wonderful, but there will be more problems. That's the nature of this world. What we need to do is to go to the very root and understand that when happiness comes our way, when distress comes our way, regardless of how often it happens, what tends to be predominating now and then predominating in the future, that we ourselves are never affected. Once you understand that you are that eternal Atman, that you are that eternal soul who is not affected, really, within, and that our nature is eternal bliss. Not just happiness in the material sense. Not just, oh, I won the lottery. Oh, that's nice. That would make a person happy until you waste all the money or something happens, or because you have all that money and now you're investing it. Now you have more causes for anxiety. Now, oh my Lord, I just invested this money, and what just happened to the stock market? Oh no, anxiety. You see that happen. You go from neutrality to happiness, now to anxiety. You know, and then the stock markets are doing well. Oh, I'm happy again. And now, oh, not so good. Oh, just up and down, up and down. What is spiritual happiness? It's equilibrium. It is a happiness that is there constant no matter what. And more, it's not merely a happiness. When we understand that we can experience something that transcends quite literally even happiness, that we can experience something that is bliss, that is anandam. You know, having come here for some time, attending these talks, attending the meditations, doing meditations, I'm sure many people here have actually had glimpses of that bliss. But for those who haven't, imagine the greatest thing that you thought was bliss in your entire life. And imagine a true bliss that makes that pale in comparison and seem like nothing. Literally seem like nothing. This is ultimately what will produce true and lasting happiness. And as a result of having this bliss, and thus conquering, transcending ego, what will then be the greatest charitable work that we can do? Theoretically, all war could end. Theoretically, all conflict could end. Theoretically, all need for politics can come to an end if we transcend our ego. Now, of course, that's the highest ideal. We know, of course, that as free will beings, that won't happen. There will always be people who will grab on to that ego and not want to let go. But still, we understand that really this is the greatest cause if we want to do something good for humanity. So how do we help people? Help them spiritually. And do things such that you are performing seva, service, and not merely charity. Again, charity too. Charity too, that's important. But seva is more important. What does this mean? How does this look like? What does this look like? Everyone we meet must see in us something that they want to be. They may not even know why. But we must ourselves make ourselves into such beings such that anyone who encounters us, what they encounter is a person who has such joy, such peace, such wisdom, such assurance, and not assurance because of blind faith, assurance because they have seen truth, such that when they encounter us, the first thing that comes to their mind is, what is different about this person? Second thing that comes to their mind is, whatever is different about this person, it's wonderful. It's something wonderful. Third thing that comes to their mind after that is, I want that. I want that. And more, you can go one step further. Certainly being such an individual is important. See, this is the greatest sage, such that they don't even have to open their mouth. Someone is just in their presence and they say, oh, I want to be like that. But more, we should also open our mouth. What does that mean? To not be afraid to give people spiritual counsel. And again, what I mean by this, and I always have to stress this means teaching, not preaching. Teaching, not preaching. You see, we're not, we're not like evangelical Christians. We're not people who want to start knocking on people's doors and saying, oh, yeah, have you experienced the bliss of knowing Krishna? No, we don't want to do that, But we do want to teach people. We do want to teach people. And what this means is waiting for them, having the respect for them such that when they are open to now hearing something that can truly help them spiritually, we have to not be shy. To say to them, well, listen, we've been friends for years, and you've been telling me about these terrible sufferings you've been going through and everything, and I've tried to give you lots of good practical advice, but ultimately, let me tell you what's worked for me. What's worked for me has been meditating. And what I have found is that in my life, week after week, month after month, year after year, as I meditate, I have found a peace that is beyond description, to the point where, honestly, the kind of things that you've been going through, I actually went through similar things and they just don't affect me anymore. Imagine when you can say that to a person. Imagine the impact that will have on them. This is what it means to truly help the world. We are all called upon to be spiritual teachers. In our own way. In our own way. When we hear the concept of guru, there are many different levels of what it means to be a guru. Ideally, when a person wants to truly approach a guru in a very conscious sort of way, they want to make sure that that's a self-realized being. They want to make sure that it's someone who truly can help them traverse the path toward truth. However, truthfully, if a person simply gives us good advice that is true and wise, in that instant, that person was in a way a guru. So, how do we express compassion to other people? In a practical way? In a way, become like a guru. Become a teacher to other people. And again, that means first and foremost that we are living our lives in such a way, and we are emanating love in such a way that initially we don't even have to open our mouths. They simply have to observe us and say, whoa, this person has something to teach me. But then, secondly, we open our mouth. We do open our mouth. Try to help people as much as possible. So, this is great compassion. This is Maha-karuna. See, with so many instances where examples are given throughout the Vedic scriptures, the best way to give examples is to provide the maximal superlative model of something. So in other words, express perfection. Express perfection and say that's our goal. And for some people that will scare them. But for others, they understand, no, that's my long-term goal. Let me slowly, however quickly I can as an individual, so for some people it will be slower, for some people faster, but however fast I can as an individual, let me progress toward that ideal. So again, when it gives this very, very, very high ideal of an individual who has so much compassion for humanity that they understand the temporality of the body and they are willing to literally give of themselves, literally die, to express love and compassion and to help other beings. Again, that's the ideal. That's what we're striving for. We may not reach that for 10 lifetimes, or maybe the end of this lifetime, or maybe some of us are there already. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that's the highest ideal that we should strive for. Okay? So, compassion, karuna, and great compassion, Maha-karuna. Let's all strive for this. And what this means ultimately is to help people spiritually. The greatest suffering that a person can have is to not know themselves. Who here has ever watched The Twilight Zone? And I mean especially the original one. You know, and they've repeated this idea because it's a great idea several times after The Twilight Zone. You know, the one where the person wakes up in the morning and ordinarily he has a wonderful life. You know, he's like an executive and he's got a beautiful home and he's got a beautiful family and everything's going great. But he wakes up one day and no one knows who he is. Have you seen this episode? You know, it's like his wife, who are you? What are you doing here? It's like, well, I'm your husband. He goes to work. Oh, can we help you? Who are you? He goes to his own mother's home and, well, I don't know who you are. I had a son, but my son passed away. And, you know, that's a nightmare, isn't it? When other people don't know you. Imagine if you don't know yourself. Imagine if you wake up one day and you literally don't know, where am I? You're waking up in your own bed, in your own home. And you wake up and who am I? Where am I? What's my name? Why am I here? How old am I? You know? Yet that is what we are suffering from. We use all the facts and figures about our body to make up for that loss. But spiritually, we have forgotten who and what we really are. So, this is the greatest suffering, is to not know ourselves. If this is the greatest suffering, then what is the greatest relief work that we can do if we find someone in that suffering? Help them to know themselves. Help them to know themselves. So, this is my assignment for everyone. Become like gurus. Help people to know themselves spiritually. You know? Buy copies of the Bhagavad Gita. Give them copies of the Bhagavad Gita. Send them to Dharma Central. Trust me, that's all they'll need. We have so much on there now. You know, challenge them. Say, don't get back to me until you've gone to Dharma Central and read every single article, looked at every single...
I want my brother to do that. He is...
Really?
Yeah, he's reading it, yeah.
Good, good.
We'll hear from him for a while.
Yeah.
He's in Nepal and, you know, he always complains about, you know, because we don't have a teaching system there, you know, so he always said, I said, go there, and he's like, oh, that is so good. I'm like,
Yeah, that was the goal with Dharma Central, was to make it the guru of the internet. You know, and it's not perfect yet, but we're getting there. We're getting there to the point where we want to make it a place where, yes, if a person does not have access to a guru or to a place like this, oh, and there are a lot of people who don't, they can just go to Dharma Central and they'll have everything there. They'll have 200 articles, they'll have all sorts of videos. Eventually we want to have all of our videos up on Dharma Central in addition to YouTube. If you're too shy to even talk about someone too much spiritually, or you just don't think you have it in you, you know, think to yourself, who am I, what do I know, you know, all right, send them to Dharma Central. Send them there, you know, buy copies of the Bhagavad Gita, you know, you can purchase copies very inexpensively, you know, for just a few dollars each. Have them ready, always keep one with you. You encounter someone, you're on an airplane, and the person next to you strikes up a conversation, you know. I actually had this happen once. I forget what year, it was a very long time ago. I was on my way to Los Angeles and the person next to me struck up a conversation, and it was very pleasant at first, but then after a while it became very obvious that the person was a Jehovah's Witness, and really the reason why they were speaking to me was, of course, to try to convert me. But interestingly, once I understood what the person was doing, we actually had a very good conversation, and the person actually ended up, you know, at least trying to be very open-minded. And of course, I had the Bhagavad Gita with me. I just gave it to the person. And I said, look, please promise me something. I have read the Bible backwards and forwards. Have you read the Bhagavad Gita? Oh, no, I've heard of it. Here's a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. I've read your scripture. You know, please read this. And the person very nicely, and I believe them, actually said, well, you know what? I have heard of the Bhagavad Gita, and, you know, I believe very much in my faith, but, you know, I will read it. I will. And they thanked me. And maybe the person is still a Jehovah's Witness, you know, 10, 20 years later, but that doesn't matter, because at least a germ was planted within their mind. If the person did read the Bhagavad Gita, maybe it made them think about something. Maybe it opened something in them in such a way that maybe not this lifetime, maybe the next lifetime, they will be able to express their spirituality in a less fanatical way and in a more progressive sort of way, where they're actually making progress toward the divine in a more systematic sort of way. and not just blind faith. So.
अस्य श्रीरामरक्षास्तोत्रमहामन्त्रस्य बुधकौशिकऋषिः श्रीसीतारामचन्द्रो देवता अनुष्टुप्छन्दः सीताशक्तिः श्रीमतुहनुमान् कीलकम् श्रीरामचन्द्रप्रसादफलसिद्ध्यर्थे रामरक्षास्तोत्रपारायणे जपे विनियोगः ध्यायेदाजानुबाहुं धृतशरधनुषं बद्धपद्मासनस्थं पीतं वासोवसानं नवकमलदलस्पर्धिनेत्रं प्रसन्नं वामाङ्कारूढसीतामुखकमलमिलल्लोचनौ नीरदा